Oh, recording now. But now I can't see him. Oh, there is his back. Okay. Let me close my door. Thanks, Baron. All right.
Okay.
Thanks, Baron. Okay. Okay. All right. Good day. My name is Thobeka Dhlomo. I am in conversation with Fred Khumalo, award-winning writer, and I'm very, very honored at this moment to be chatting with him. It is the 53rd time of the writer. Of course, things are looking and sounding a bit different than what we expected, but nonetheless, here we are. We are able to have a conversation. Sawamgela, thank you so much for your time. Hello? Can you hear me, Babu Kuman?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So I would like firstly to just introduce the person I'm going to be speaspeaking to, namhlanje. Ubaba Fred Khumalo is a novelist. He is based in Johannesburg. He's an author of 11 books. And today in this conversation, we are going to be focusing on his latest work, which is The Longest March. But before I start focusing on that work that we're going to be talking about, Your Longest March, Babu Khumalo, I'd like to actually just start. I know these days you go mostly as you are a journalist, but you're focusing more on writing. And I'd just like to find out from you as Umbali, what is it that really inspires your writing? I mean, these days we're seeing you writing a lot, tapping into a lot of very important details of our history here in South Africa that might have been left out. But when we read your work of late, since your last offering, and then now we're going to get into your work now, The Longest March, where you're tapping into very, very crucial parts of our history, which we may not have had a lot of information about, in the archives. So as a writer, what is it that is your objective and your main purpose as you pick on stories to write?
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. What has inspired my new book and the one previous, just before that, which was Dancing the Death Drill? I noticed some gap in the telling of our history. So I sought out to correct some impressions or to fill out those gaps. But obviously, I didn't want to write textbooks, history textbooks. So I set out to write, to popularize our history. And the best vehicle for that is writing a novel, highlighting those events or those incidents of our history that I felt had been either distorted or underreported or completely obliterated from the pages of history. Hence the story of the men who went down with the Mendi in 1917 during the First World War. That is the story that I told in my other book, Dancing the Death Drill.
Yeah.
And then I came to this one, The Longest March. Again, it's a historical text. But the idea here is to use history as the background while also humanizing people who might have been affected by these historical incidents.
Very interesting that you mentioned that, where you're saying you humanizing people who might have been affected and might possibly not have had a voice, almost obviously. And then I like where you're going into, where you're fictionalizing, but also you're writing this history. There must be a lot of research, obviously, that comes with that. We understand that the history of this country is very volatile, so one needs to really, really be factual when one is writing about this history. But also when you juxtapose to you bringing the fictional characters into it. Maybe speak to me about the research that goes into this, maybe the body of research that one has to do in order to capture this accurately.
Yes, this particular novel required of me to read a lot. Well, thankfully, it's okay. Maybe let's start with the summary of the book itself so that the listener at home can appreciate where we're going and where we're coming from.
Yes.
So
Yes.
before the outbreak of the Anglo-Boer War of 1899, black people who worked on the mines or who worked in Johannesburg in general found themselves trapped in the city. They wanted to go back home, but the trains that they would have taken home had been taken over by the army. So they had to walk back home, and that involved lots of distances. So I focused on one particular group of Zulu men and some women and children who were compelled by circumstances beyond their control to walk from Johannesburg all the way to Natal and Zululand, as the territory was called at that time. So that's a distance of 420 kilometers. They covered it in 10 days with their belongings and so on. So that particular walk by these guys was reported by the newspapers of that time. So if you go to any good library, newspaper library, you visit the newspaper archives, you will find a newspaper reportage on this particular story. So I relied on how the newspapers of the time reported this story, but also there was a book written by an academic, just telling the story of Johannesburg at that time, the conditions, how did the mine workers live, what kind of food were they eating. So I had to read that kind of book. I read Charles van Onselen as well, who's a very good historian, but he's telling the story obviously from the point of view of a white academic. Now I felt there were nuances to the story that were missed in the book that he wrote, the New Nineveh and New Babylon. So I harvested as much as I could from that book, but I used my imagination as a historian. I mean, as a novelist.
Yes.
So that's how I got around telling this story.
Thank you very much for going a bit in depth. Obviously, we don't want to give everything away for those who haven't read, but obviously we also want to just touch a bit so that the viewers can understand what they can expect. There's a character there who's quite interesting, because I like the fact that when you do read about this particular march, it's not really referred to anything much more than it says the Marwick March. And that's one of the characters in the books that you really, really go into, who actually is very bold in their character and was very significant in the story. One question, why am Ngempela Umawik?
Okay, Marwick was a real life character. He was a white guy from Richmond, you know, the town of Richmond in KZN. But he worked on the mines. He was a native agent. He helped the mines recruit black people from Natal and Zululand in particular. Because he could speak Zulu, many black people, you know how kind-hearted we are. Sometimes we are naive. We are very naive. We are Standa Lomlung. He likes us. So Muhle Lomlung. So that's how the name came about. Kwamuhle. And you know the museum in Durban right now. It is named after. Yeah.
Yes, that's a very popular museum there.
He was the only guy who walked with these guys, with these 7,000 Zulu men and children and women who walked from Johannesburg to Natal. So he actually was at the forefront of the march, but he was ably assisted by a prominent Izinduna and other prominent guys from the community, because really you cannot expect one white guy to lead a march of 7,000 Zulu people who are very independent minded. So that is what I try to highlight in the novel, to say there were other heroes to this story who haven't been acknowledged.
I'd like to go a bit in depth to the type of writing you do, the stories you tell, and you touched a bit earlier on why you write these stories. African literature, decoloniality, those are words that we hear being thrown around all the time when we attend seminars, especially in institutions of higher learning, where most of the time it's deemed that academics reside in institutions of higher learning where you find that might be a misconception because we find intellectuals in other spheres, your arts and other spheres. So in your writing, I like the fact that you do touch on matters that really might not have been touched on by people who are not of our color or our background, or people who might not have that interest, which is very, very interesting as a person who works the type of work you do and also is in public figure where people can reach your work. Do you find that it's difficult, or do you find that now that you're focusing more on your writing, it gives you more leeway to do that as opposed to when you were in the newsroom, obviously knowing the climate of things, not now, maybe then when you were practicing? And also, what is the state of African literature as we stand now?
Yeah, very challenging question right there. Um, my my idea of a writer is that of a person who's a mirror, who brings mirror to society to say this is what you look like. So I try to. I'm not an academic. Uh, I try to take the stories that reside in academia back to the people. We climb the ivory towers and say, these are your stories, own them. So I try to write my story in as accessible a manner as possible. As I said earlier, I try to popularize fiction, which to some people can be very intimidating and equally boring. So when you introduce character, when you tell the story through human beings rather than soldiers and generals of armies and so on, people can relate to ordinary human beings like Mangwane and Umusha and so on. So that is a challenge one faces as a novelist. How do you mystify history? How do you popularize it without trivializing it? So that's the challenge that one is grappling with. And I see that is being replicated, that is being done all over the continent. As you alluded to the whole notion of decoloniality, a lot of good work is coming out of the continent and from the diaspora. So you get people like Chimamanda, you get people like Marlon James telling stories of the Africa of old, whose story has been distorted by historians who have used history to serve their own political agendas and so on. We are wrestling that history as writers back from the academy, back from the colonizers to us. And it's going to be a long, drawn, and contested a struggle, as you can imagine, because there are many interests being protected here. So yeah, I revel in the challenge. I enjoy the challenge. Thankfully, I'm no longer fully employed. I have the energy and the time to really focus on what I'm doing now without any distractions that I used to have while I was working for newspapers.
As you delve into these South African stories that have never really been written from a different angle, Dancing the Death Drill then becomes an international story. And this is now amazing, not just for you, because you know this, you write these stories, but now it's amazing because these stories that are not told are actually, people are looking to hear these stories.
Yes, I was truly impressed and heartened when a theater company adapted my book, Dancing the Death Drill, for the stage. As you know, the play has been performed in Southampton, in Norway, and so on. So the story, once again, has uh, been taken back to the international stage. for the international community to enjoy, probably critique, and maybe take it to another level. Because I don't own the story of the Mendy myself. I was just telling one aspect of it, one corner of it. So I hope it gains currency internationally, and yeah, people can enjoy it and interpret it the way they want to.
Brilliant, brilliant. Congratulations on that. And then going back to the story that we are talking about, the longest march. You see, before we talk about the fact that you did embark on a march, I'd like to just find out about some of the issues that you tap into there, which are kind of sensitive, maybe not so right now because we speak about them as often as we can in inner circles, but also we ask questions as whether they existed in those times. And in this book, you sort of show that there might have existed in those times issues of interracial relationships. We look at issues of homophobia and etc., things that we might find difficult to really openly talk about today. Yet we are experiencing those things. They are real, and they may not even be issues anymore.
Oh yeah, the issue of homosexuality in the black community. It's one of those subjects that people do not want to speak about, but it actually happened especially on the mines. But even now, the complicating factor is the men who were sleeping with other men on the mines didn't regard themselves as queer, as homosexual, or however you want to express it. They were merely satisfying their sexual urges because they were saying to themselves, we've got our wives and girlfriends back home. But while we are here, we are responding to our urges. So they slept with each other. And it's a well-documented fact. So the name for the younger boys or the younger men who slept with the older guys were called Omakotana, the boy brides. That is a documented fact. So I bring that to the fore because I felt it would resonate with our contemporary times. The issue of being queer being one of the major topics of our times. So I decided to bring it into the story because it really happened. And the issue of xenophobia. If I mean, if you go back very briefly into the history of our minds, at the turn of the century, the majority of black people who worked on our gold mines were not black South Africans. They were actually from Mozambique. The majority, 80%, 70 to 80% were from Mozambique, the ones who went down into the belly of the earth. And that is documented further again in a new book by Charles van Onselen, The Night Train. So I decided to bring it to the fore again because there were clashes on the mines between the different ethnic groups, AmaZulu, AmaShangana, AseMozambique, AbeSuthu, BaseLesotho, and so on. These things did happen, and they were documented in the newspapers of the time because people killed each other. So I decided to bring it into the story. What was the issue? The other issue that you brought?
The interracial relationships we've seen.
Oh yeah. Of course, that happened a lot, but certainly not on the mines. This is my imagination as a novelist. So do grant me my poetic license. But it happened, especially in the Amazemtiti circles. Black people who were exempted from so-called native laws. They were the ones who just got married to white women and vice versa. But you will recall that many white men did have interracial relationships with black women, even though they didn't marry them, which is why there's a prevalence of colored people in KwaZulu-Natal and so on. So I try to bring all these issues because I think they all are a talking point in our contemporary society.
Definitely.
A novel, of course, is supposed to entertain. It's supposed to also provoke debate, and that is what I was hoping to achieve through this book.
Definitely. Not only did you then write the book, but you also embarked on a march last year, um, which I think is actually great. You got a bit practical on top of that. So, what inspired you to do that? To actually go on this march? Of course, it wasn't as brutal, but it must have taken a lot for you to do that as well. No, with things happening. But what inspired you to do that? Obviously, the story must have. But on top of that, what was the extra motivation for you to do that? And also, what did you achieve when after you embarked on that march? Internally, what did it feel like for you?
There are many factors here. And of course, ego is one of them. I won't lie to you. I just wanted to prove how fit I am, you know. But I also wanted to highlight this thing that it actually happened. I wanted to bring it to the public, under the public purview. And people did speak about it. So much so that when I reached my final destination, which was Ladysmith, the town council of Ladysmith honored me with a trophy, and the mayor of Ladysmith said, "Khumalo, can you do this as an annual thing? We are going to sponsor it." So I'm going to be doing it annually, and hopefully more people will join me. But the logistics obviously are still being worked out as to how it's going to happen, because it can be dangerous if you have too many people walking at the same time. Because the route that I used is not the freeway, it's not the N1 freeway that goes straight to Durban. It's the old Standerton Road. The roads are not really conducive to pedestrians. So maybe 10, 20 people would be enough, not a whole a big group. So when I do embark on the march in October, I will limit the number of people who join me. But it is going to happen because the council or the mayor of Ladysmith is going to sponsor it, because to them, it ties in with their commercial strategy, because they've got many war memorials in Ladysmith, as you know. Many battles, especially during the Anglo-Boer War, were fought in the Ladysmith area. So they've got many war memorials, including the Ladysmith Siege Museum, which is there in the town of Ladysmith. So for them as Ladysmith, it makes a lot of commercial sense in terms of tourism and so on. So yes, that is what happened, and that is what we're looking at going forward.
We look forward to being part of that as well when it happens, Babu Khumalo. So now going forward, I mean you've done quite a number of things. You've shortlisted twice for the Commonwealth Short Story Prize, once for the Short Story Day Africa Award. You're author of 11 books, obviously. What can we expect to see from you going forward? We would still like to swallow a lot more of what you have to offer to us. So what can we expect from you going forward?
Yeah, well, I'll continue, right? I've got a new book coming out in August this year, and but it's not a historical novel; it's a biography. And then next year, I'm hoping to release another another piece of our history that hasn't been told, I believe, properly. It hasn't been given its context properly. The story of the Bambata Rebellion. So I'm working on a novel on that particular story. So I'm hoping to release that book next year. Now, another challenge of mine, I've been writing in English for a long time. Of the 11 books, 2 are written in isiZulu. So going forward, I'll be trying to write more in my mother tongue, and perhaps bring some of the books that I've published in English into my mother tongue in isiZulu, because English is so limited, and there are many of our people who can read, but who are not proficient in English. So when we write when we limit ourselves to English, we are cutting we are doing them a disservice. We are alienating them. So I'm hoping that I'll be doing more of translation from English into isiZulu and writing some books directly in Zulu and maybe later translating them into English. But I've only got two hands. I can't do everything at the same time, but I'll do my best.
That sounds amazing. Sounds amazing. We look forward to that, Khumalo. And then the book is published by Penguin. How do we get a hold of it? How do we make sure that we have the book on our shelves?
Yes, the book is available at all good bookstores. In Durban, it's there at Adams. It is there at Ike's Books. And nationwide, it's available at Bargain Books, Exclusive Books. And failing which, you can buy it directly from me. You can just inbox me. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram. I do sell books from my house as well for those who don't have access to exclusive books and so on. So you can buy it directly from me.
Baba Khumalo, it's been awesome being in conversation with you. Thank you so much for your work. We look forward to more of your work. And thank you so much for taking time to chat to us here at Time of the Writer.
Thank you, Dinangwe. Thank you for the support and good luck with the project.
I'm Thobeka Dhlomo. Thank you very much for watching.